everybody. I'm Kim C, and this is my Stephen King podcast where I take King's underrated works and put them on the conveyor belt of literary analysis. And when I'm not picking apart, dissecting, and discussing the findings in my mad laboratory, I like to connect with other King folk to compare my data. And I get a lot of help with that today from my constant reader interview guest, podcaster, literary critic, and King fan, Matt Freeman from Kingslingers. Before we go any further, I just remembered I actually need to address him as Dr. Freeman, because Matt has a PhD from Texas A&M, pretty sure I got that right, the university that is, in engineering, and that's where he met Scott Daly. They were college buddies! Isn't that the best? Those two kept in touch, and the rest is King history. Matt has been steadily making his way across King's vast and prolific amount of stories. He's made a really good dent with all 7 Dark Tower novels, The Stand, The Long Walk, Hearts in Atlantis, and they're currently in the middle of Matt's very first time with Pennywise and the Kids from Derry. This was such an amazing conversation, friends. Thanks to Matt, I have a whole new appreciation for The Long Walk, which is a huge feat unto itself. We go here, we go there, we go everywhere, and it is such a rich hour of conversation. I can't wait for you to hear it. Let us now dive into our second interview of this double interview Blue Moon glory with the second owner of Doof Media and the co-host of Kingslingers, Dr. Matt Freeman. All right, ladies and gentlemen, may I present today's guest of honor. This is Dr. Matt Freeman from Kingslingers. Welcome, Dr. Freeman, to the show.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Ooh, I'm freaking out. I'm excited. It's always the roller coaster drop when I get to meet you and introduce you and start the show. Tell me about Kingslingers, Dr. Freeman.
Well, Kingslingers is a podcast that was started by Scott and I in early 2020. The idea was that my old-time friend and podcast mate Scott realized that I had read hardly any Stephen King whatsoever. Funnily enough, the only book I had happened to read was Needful Things, which most people don't regard as one of his best, but I actually think is quite a fun book. But in any case, Scott had the idea that we would do a Dark Tower podcast where he would lead me through the Dark Tower like a dark figure in the distance ahead, who I would be following chapter by chapter, book by book. And that's how we started out. We went through the Dark Tower novels. It took us over a year. I don't remember exactly how long. We finished those. Then we moved on to Dark Tower adjacent novels. And now we're doing just books that Scott likes, to be honest, because we're having a fun ride. There's no need to get off the ride yet. There's plenty of books left. So that's where we are right now with Kingslingers. I'm the ignorant doofus who tries to make predictions about what's going to happen in the books, and Scott titters behind his hand or tries to hide his shock as I come up with a correct deduction, as the case may be. And that's pretty much the dynamic. We have a lot of fun, and we hope that our listeners do too.
I love it. I'm so excited to have you here, and it's so nice talking with someone who's pretty new to the King party. I haven't been here very long myself, maybe about 10 years, so I have a lot of catching up to do for sure. I'm only on the 4th Dark Tower novel. I just finished Wizard and Glass for the first time, so I'm still recovering from it.
Yeah. The Dark Tower is a fascinating animal. And I know I'm not going to talk about it too much because I know you haven't finished, but it is a very unique literary experience.
Perfectly said. So we know that Needful Things was your very first King title. Was that something that was put into your hands? Did someone recommend it? Did your parents read it? How old were you?
I think I was probably 16 or so, and it was just that my mom bought it or had it in the house or handed it to me, and I don't even think she had read it. It was very random, very, very random. And that was honestly pretty much it, other than the normal amount of Stephen King adaptations that an American youth consumes in the course of growing up.
So, since you began your Dark Tower journey and your Stephen King journey with Scott, how many titles would you say you have under your belt at this current time?
Plus or minus 18 novels and 23 short stories is where we are currently. And I say plus or minus because it depends on how you count Hearts in Atlantis. Is that is that several short stories? Is that one novel that's broken up into pieces? Are you familiar with Hearts in Atlantis?
I am.
Okay. And that's one of my favorite of his works, by the way. So that's why I'm belaboring the point. But yeah, that's roughly the count at this point. Yep.
I have an episode on Hearts in Atlantis, and I was like, short story? No, no, one novella, a couple of slices of. I had a really hard time.
Yeah,
That one's a very unique one.
I totally agree.
Out of the titles that you've journeyed through thus far, have you encountered one, and this could have been from Scott's additional commentary, where he kind of lets you know this story is pretty much hated by a lot of people, and you're like, how? I loved it. And vice versa. Did you hate something or really dislike something and you found out it was a fan favorite?
I am not a big fan of hating things personally. And I so me and Scott's thing, this dynamic that we've developed between ourselves is basically just that it's more fun to talk about what worked, what we liked, maybe sometimes talk about how something could have been different and might have been better if it was different. But we very rarely just go all in on just this was trash. I hated it. It was garbage. Even if there's something that didn't work for me, I think it's more interesting personally to be like, well, why didn't this work for me? Why didn't it work for me specifically? And so that being said, there's nothing of King's that I have hated. You know, maybe some of his sillier short stories, I'll just be like, this is just kind of a I'm trying to think of an example right now and failing because I actually think they're almost all fun. But some of them are just they're kind of a silly little throwaway short story. They're just kind of it probably wouldn't have been published if it wasn't Stephen King, right? And you're like, it's fine, you know. But that's not hating it. That's just dismissing it, I guess.
I wholeheartedly appreciate objectivity.
Yeah,
It's so good to have. It's hard to have sometimes, but it's good.
yeah. Not to say that sometimes I don't hate things. It's just I've never hated anything of King's.
Yeah, I'll have to meditate on that one because I feel the same, but I'm like, have I? I don't remember. But I'd like to say that I've done a good job of balancing subjective, objective.
Yeah, yeah. It's very difficult to do that. I mean, it's something I aspire to do it. I don't know that I always succeed. So when I say that's how me and Scott like to behave, that's how we like to behave. That's not how we always behave. But
Sure.
I think it leads to more useful and productive conversations, and I think it's more fun to listen to, especially like if somebody really hates something and you liked it and you have to listen to them rag on it. That's not fun. That's a really unfun listening experience, and I don't want to do that to people. That's one reason, just a very practical reason, not to just rag on somebody's thing that they like, right?
I so appreciate that you guys take that into consideration because, yeah, I mean, we're not in a position to yuck anyone's yum,
Mm-hmm.
like it's just heart smashing.
Yeah, yeah.
If someone spends a lot of time invested into a story, and then, yeah, I agree. I'm glad you guys do that. So I wanted to look at characters for a second. We've got some memorable and incredibly iconic characters throughout the King canon. And based on what you've digested thus far, do you have a character who you would like to see get another spotlight novel or its own spotlight novel? And this could be very similar to what Danny Torrance received in Doctor Sleep. Is there anybody who you would give a whole novel to, prequel, sequel, extra spotlight?
You got me thinking about Low Men in Yellow Coats, Hearts in Atlantis in general. And I guess it would be, I think it would be fun to see King's take on what did Bobby Garfield get up to in those intervening years, or perhaps what happens after the time skip and then ending of that story. And I say that for a few reasons, but I guess first and foremost, much of my favorite King stuff is actually mundane, non-supernatural stories about people struggling. And this is, I think, something I've heard you talk about before is having this misconception that King is this pulp writer and then realizing like, no, he's this literary writer who's very interested in human internality, who then I think cracked the code and realized that he can sell a lot more books if he puts an evil clown in every once in a while. But what I love about his writing is the characters and the psychology and all of that. So that book and Bobby Garfield as a character is just so nuanced, and there's so much to say about growing up. And I do wonder what King's interpretation of the life of Bobby Garfield as he is an adult would look like.
Oh, that just melted my heart. Low Men in Yellow Coats. It's a top 5 novella for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just thinking about Bobby Garfield and how much he moves me. So beautiful choice. I support that 1,000,000%. I love it.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad to hear that. And it's one of those things where, when people ask about King recommendations, actually, that's one that I recommend pretty close to the front. It's hard because it's like, well, obviously you want to go for the big hits that everybody loves, but I'm just like, yeah, but that's not what I love. I mean, it's not that I don't love the classics, The Shining, what have you, but I'm like, yeah, but like that's not a fair shake of what he is doing. I almost wish I had started out with Low Men in Yellow Coats, because then I would have that sense of who Stephen King is walking into the journey, instead of getting that sense way down the line, or gaining it gradually, I should say.
I consider myself lucky because Full Dark No Stars was my first King title, which is a very intense and literary novella collection.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very defining title for me that showed me King is a master storyteller rather than a pulp writer.
I haven't read those, but those will go right on my list because of your description of them as such.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. As soon as you're done, Matt, we have to talk because it is. I had just finished grad school, picked up that collection, and my world was changed. So
Beautiful.
very rich, very intense, unforgettable.
Okay.
Full on revenge and vengeance and like the dark side of the human heart. It is wonderful.
Well, I'm still, serving my tenure at Kingslingers for a few more months, but eventually I'll be able to read whatever I want, just not for a while.
I got you. In your Stephen King journey thus far, have you had the chance to reread any King titles, or has it just been sort of plowing ahead with show stuff?
Yeah, the only one that I've reread has been The Drawing of the Three. That's actually it, because we got a lot of reading to do. Parenthetically, in addition to Kingslingers, we also have a monthly book club that's just some other random book. So got quite a lot on my plate. But yeah, I did manage to fit in The Drawing of the Three. I think because that one's just the most straightforwardly fun of the books, full stop, perhaps. It's just a blast. It's just a ride.
It really is. Having finished Gunslinger and just my brain scrambled egg, like what is going on? And then you go to Drawing of the Three, and it's this bombastic is the word I will always use for it. It's so 80s testosterone, action, explosive, totally fun, totally crazy. All of these new people, love it.
Yeah, yeah. There's so many parts toward the beginning of that book where I'll just be smiling. Like, it's just pure fun. It's one of his many talents. He has many talents as a writer. One of them is understanding, how do I just give these people a fun time, and then delivering on that.
It is so good. I think a couple people, I think it was King. This is a King quote. He calls himself the burger and fries. He delivers fiction in a burger and fries format, which I kind of love.
That is delightful. Yeah. Yeah. Right on. Sometimes the way I think about it is, it's like he's sitting next to you, to say sitting next to you at a bar. And then I realize that's probably not an association that I should be making with him, but sitting next to you and telling you a story. And he's that kind of storyteller where there's no feeling of arm's length sort of pretension. It's just, he's unspooling this yarn and he's keeping your attention hooked the whole time. And he knows exactly how well he's got you. And he knows when to lay out a little bit of tension or when to bring it in. It's just a consummate storyteller in that way. In addition, of course, to all the other things he's good at, like psychology and everything else, basically.
So I do want to ask about King villains you've encountered so far. Do you have any favorites?
So to go with what I said a minute ago in terms of really liking the non-supernatural side of things, I enjoy his mundane monsters. Like we're in the middle of it right now, so Tom Rogan is on my mind, and I forget what happens where in the Dark Tower. Okay, there's Dark Tower villains I can't mention right now, but they're on the mundane side, or at least they're on the not too supernatural side. And that tends to be what I like because God, like you want to flinch away from that kind of evil in the real world. And King is so good at portraying it on the page in a way where you're like, yep, you want to write off people who are truly evil as just being sort of beyond the pale. You couldn't possibly relate to them, you couldn't possibly understand them or their thought processes. And then he writes these characters, and you're like, okay, unfortunately, I have to say that I understand this character. And that is unpleasant and kind of incredible and kind of what I go to fiction for, actually.
What are your current thoughts on Henry Bowers? I don't know how far you're in it, but what are your Henry Bowers sentiments?
He's a great example too. I mean, he is exactly the mundane evil. I think one interesting thing about his character is we get to see him as a kid and as an adult. Actually, just where we are, I've barely seen him as an adult at all, but we've mainly seen him as a kid, and I think that's kind of the fun thing that it is doing in general is it's looking at childhood psychology and examining how that propagates through to adulthood psychology, and the through line of that really invites a lot of introspection as you think back onto your own childhood, and you're like, oh wow, I really am still dominated by those same things that happened back then. So can you really say that 11-year-old kid is evil? I don't know, it doesn't quite feel right to say that, but there's this through line from the 11-year-old kid to the adult who obviously is evil. Or maybe one could dispute that. I don't know. It's very interesting. It's very thought provoking. I love that kind of thing. I love the questions about the nature of evil that any King book invites.
An amazing topic
Mm-hmm.
to pick apart and plug into for sure, especially with kid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you weren't set up for success, and Bowers undergoes tremendous amount of abuse and neglect. It's like, well, then what?
Yeah. Yeah. And he's not only that, but then he's preyed upon by this supernatural evil, right? And I don't, so I haven't even seen the shape of what that's going to take throughout the whole book. But that's always a fascinating thing in so many of King's works is that there is this dynamic between the supernatural evil and the mundane evil. There's a kind of interplay between the two that never quite absolves the mundane evil of its evil, but it does contextualize it in a way that I find really interesting and thought provoking and fun to talk about.
This question is about Stephen King endings. I don't know how or when or why, but it is amongst constant readers and Stephen King fans that the man can't end books. And I think that sentiment is because they don't want the story to end and it just kind of drops off sometimes. But the majority of constant readers I interview talk about the journey, and they're really not in it for the ending. They're in it for the journey. And so I hear both. I hear 50-50. The endings sort of gut punch you sometimes, and other people are like, who cares? But have you ever read thus far the ending was so dissatisfying that it kind of ruined the journey as a whole for you? Or do you just kind of have a different approach to endings?
Okay, I'll pick one since you asked. But generally, I'll just mention like one of my other favorite authors is Neil Stevenson, who notoriously has terrible endings, and I just don't care. I'm just there for the ride. Um, and so I generally am there for the ride. But I will say the short story, have you read this one?
Yes, I have.
So it's basically an ad for Amazon Kindle, and I think that what happened was King was writing an okay story, and then he remembered that this is supposed to be an ad for Amazon Kindle, and then he swerved violently toward the end. And overall, that story, again, I said I don't hate any of his books, and that's true. But this is the one where it's just like, this is barely a story at all, and especially the way it ends, you're just like, I kind of feel like if you caught him in the right mood, he would be like, yeah, that one. I don't know about that one. So yeah, is not my favorite ending of the Stephen King novels because it turns in a way where it's like, and then everything was fine, the end, which is not a natural Stephen King ending and not the right ending for that story.
I would agree with that. I was definitely like, what? Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
My next question is very open-ended, so I'm really looking forward to your thoughts because it's just huge. The entire question is your thoughts on the Dark Tower, and seeing as though it is a huge part of your Stephen King journey, tell me.
It's impossible, right, to encompass it. So I'm going to take the Robert Pirsig approach and just pick one tiny thing about it to talk about, which is the fact that it is a love letter to all of these other things that Stephen King has loved, these other pieces of fiction that he has loved, that he wants to introduce you to in his own way. So The Wastelands is this love letter to the Wastelands. There's Lord of the Flies in a lot of his stuff. There's Lord of the Rings throughout much of his stuff, particularly The Dark Tower. And our Kingslingers listeners are likely laughing now because I try to find the Lord of the Rings in everything because I love Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And I love that about Stephen King, that he takes these things that he loves. It's not like he tries to pass, it's not like he tries to launder the fact that he likes Lord of the Rings. He's like, yeah, I love Lord of the Rings. It's awesome. And here's my homage to it. It's going to be in your face and it's going to be obvious. There's no shame at all. It's just, the other one is Watership Down, which was another novel that I hadn't even read. We actually read Watership Down because he references it so much in The Stand. And then I was like, oh my God, the Watership Down has become one of my favorite novels now, like not exaggerating. And you realize how much of his storytelling sensibility is reminiscent of this tale of these bunnies going on this journey together. There's the Dark Tower is in there. It's all this web of intertextuality, and in the case of the Dark Tower, like explicit metatextuality, but not like in a pretentious way that would make you think he's like, oh, he's so enamored of his cleverness. It's like, no, he just loves these things and he wants to share them with you. He's having fun and he wants you to have fun. He wants you to see what's great about this stuff, and he's inviting you in. It's this inviting stance toward literature, and he's using his pulp sci-fi western fantasy story to bring you in. And I think that's very, very fun, and just I like it for its own sake. And I also love that he has tricked me into reading all of these great things like Watership Down by virtue of connecting them to his stories.
Oh, well said. I'm a huge rabbit fan in general, so Watership Down crushes me heart and soul. I agree, and I'm so glad that you brought up the topic of how he references so many literary works. And one of the reasons I love King so much is I feel so close to him as an English teacher. And I know that when he's writing these stories, I'm like, you are teaching English right now. You are teaching school. You
Mm-hmm.
are, and you never stopped. This was like an early thing you did when you were Struggle Bus McGee, and now you are a bajillionaire, but you are still taking us to school. You are
Mm-hmm.
still putting us in that classroom, whether Lord of the Flies is in there, Lord of the Rings. He does a lot of gothic stuff with Rebecca in certain texts. It's amazing.
I'm sure there's stuff I'm missing, by the way. Like if you're like, I can't believe he didn't mention this thing. It's like, oh, then please tell me, because it's entirely possible that I've just like missed a thing that he's trying to transmit to me. But Rebecca, okay, I'll write that down.
Yeah, he was playing around with gothic stuff in the late 90s, I think. And so he took Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and that's what Bag of Bones, that's sort of like
Mm,
the tie-in piece. I don't know if it's concretely there, but when I read The Long Walk, that is The Heart of Darkness
mm,
by Joseph Conrad, I think.
sure.
We also have With the Mist, that's totally George Orwell, War of the Worlds.
Sure.
I'm blanking on last names.
Yeah.
I always am like, is that the right person? But anyway, there's all these classic texts that one can infer. And so I just love it so much because we're in school. We're in
Yeah.
school always.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now that you've got my, yeah, so like there's a lot of Lovecraft
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of his cosmic horror, very explicit references to Lovecraft, and quite a lot of Poe
Oh, yeah.
in The Shining as one example. So yeah, and again, it's so much fun. It's just he's sharing it with you. It's this spirit of love and inclusivity, and it just makes me smile whenever it happens. So you asked me to talk about the Dark Tower. It's like, well, that's that's the one angle where I was most surprised, I'll say, is, I was expecting robots and cowboys. I wasn't expecting to be taken on this journey through modern literature like this. And I didn't expect to love it as much as I did.
Oh, so beautiful. It makes my heart so happy. So I do want to nerd out with you really quick on some loader stuff because I started my Dark Tower journey 2021 and just went in cold with the Gunslinger. And it felt like it was really druggy and was just sort of trying to figure out each disjointed section. But one thing that I immediately grabbed onto was the Lord of the Rings-esque floating around. And so with the Crimson King and the Man in Black, I instantly compared them to Sauron and Saruman. And so that was how I latched on. I was like,
Mhm.
okay, there's the Man in Black. He has to be Saruman. And then there's the Crimson King. He has to be Sauron. I don't know if I'm right at all, but that was something that helped me navigate the Gunslinger and just hold on for the ride.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I'm gonna use my well-worn poker face to not tell you whether you're right, obviously, but I mean, you can definitely see that he even has the iconography of the king being represented by a red eye,
Yep.
right? Which is like, it's like, okay, yeah, he's clearly meant to associate with Sauron and the vibe of Sauron, for lack of a better word. The idea that you never really see Sauron in Lord of the Rings. He's this presence of profound evil and darkness, so terrifying that like a glimpse of him through a magical stone, brushing his mental fingers across your mind will traumatize you, right? And that's the vibe he goes for with the Crimson King for sure. It's absolutely meant to evoke Sauron, and I think that's pretty clear and safe to say, honestly.
Yeah, and I did the podcast and I was just, speaking into the void, trying to like, do I have it, everyone? Like, is this it? Is this it? Like, is this some loader stuff going on? So I'm happy to know that I wasn't completely far off with that. That makes
Mhm.
me very happy. But I just finished Wizard and Glass, so I know who the Man in Black is.
Okay,
I mean, I have a version
sure.
which I loved. I'm still an emotional wreck over Wizard and Glass. I thought it was incredible and it just threw my heart into a wood chipper.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an amazing one, right? I mean, it's like, that's another cool thing about the Dark Tower is every book is so different. So you can have just the three that we just mentioned. So the Gunslinger, very strange, very unique, actually turns a lot of people off due to how weird it is. And then followed by the Drawing of the Three, which is just a roller coaster ride, pure fun, totally unlike the Gunslinger. And then of course Wizard and Glass is this like high tragedy, which feels totally different from either of the other two. I'd say they're all sort of like this. To some, I think he does it somewhat intentionally. Like I think he's kind of playing this game of, it's like the Beatles' White Album. I think actually it was Scott who said this, honestly. Big music guy, also, I have to admit. It's just demonstrating, oh yeah, I can do this and I can do this and I can do this. And now we're going to have this kind of story. And also I can do this kind of story. And you're going to have fun with all of them.
The flexing is real. I think
Yeah.
you're dead on. The flexing is very real. And I think we see this a lot with the short stories, with some of the later ones or the more current ones in the last 20 years. I think either The Bazaar of Bad Dreams or Just After Sunset, where we get those author forwards or author
Mhm.
afterwards, and he says, I was spending a lot of time with Raymond Carver and I decided to just imitate his style. Or
Uh-huh.
who was the guy who just passed away? He wrote No Country for Old Men. I'm drawing a blank.
Cormac McCarthy.
There you go. He's like, I just wanted to see if I could have a crack at McCarthy's style, which blows me away because he
Uh-huh.
just effortlessly does it.
That's so funny. You want to hear an embarrassing thing that I said? We were talking about Blood Meridian, McCarthy's
Yep.
novel.
Yep.
We were doing a YouTube book club, and I was confidently asserting that The Gunslinger was inspired by Blood Meridian, and I was enumerating this list of similarities between the two, where incontrovertible evidence that The Gunslinger was inspired by Blood Meridian, and then like mid sentence realized that Blood Meridian was released after The Gunslinger, which invites a whole different question. Was Blood Meridian inspired by The Gunslinger? I don't know that there's anyone who's ever really pursued this question, dear readers, dear listeners.
Ooh, I love a challenge. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's huge. Chicken or the egg.
Chicken or the egg, or just or honestly, two authors being inspired by similar primary materials from the past, right?
There you go.
Also possible. I'll admit, tangential possibility.
My next question is about film and television. Do you have any favorite film or TV adaptations that you've encountered thus far on your King journey?
We sort of an auxiliary show we do as a as Patreon bonus content, to be honest, is that we go through the adaptations and we try to stick to the good ones because it's just not that much fun to talk about something that's bad and that everyone knows is bad. But my favorites from that series, I'll tell you my short list. Secret Window, like that one a lot. Shawshank Redemption, it's like, of course, right? Of course, Shawshank. Misery is just an amazing movie. It's just an incredible movie. And I really, really like Doctor Sleep. I haven't read Doctor Sleep, but I think that was one of my first exposures to
Flanagan?
Flanagan.
Nice.
I was blown away, and I was like, he gets he gets what King's trying to do better than, for my money, any of these other filmmakers, and executes on it. Actually, my takeaway from Doctor Sleep is I was like, this was a better Dark Tower adaptation than the Dark Tower movie. And what I mean when I say that is like it felt more Dark Tower. It felt like something out of King's cosmos as a film. So I also liked A Good Marriage. I liked Carrie 1976. I liked Gerald's Game quite a lot. I like Christine. There's like a ton of adaptations, right? A lot of them are really good too. So it's hard to pick one. If I had to pick one, I'd probably say Shawshank, which is very boring of an answer, but it is just a perfect movie, to be honest.
Have you seen The Green Mile yet?
That is our next on the docket. I have not seen it.
Oh, okay. I'm thrilled for you. I'm
Great.
just automatically thrilled for you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm excited.
That one, the credits are starting and I'm crying. It's just one of those like
Okay.
the intro music is just starting and I'm sobbing. Probably because the novel's so incredible for me and so moving, and then Frank Darabont just makes magic. So
Awesome. Awesome.
I'm a fan. How I don't know if you guys have talked about it on Kingslingers, forgive me. I'm sure you have. What are the emotions surrounding Flanagan's adapting of the tower?
Oh, very, very excited. I mean, excited and hopeful, and like trying to not be too hopeful because sometimes these things don't work out, right?
Right.
It's been a great period of time for adaptations, just in general. I don't know what your feelings are on the Rings of Power show, but it's fun. I think I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and I'm willing to set aside my like nerdy pedanticness and just be like, "Yay, Galadriel! Yay!" And I try to have that attitude toward adaptations because the thing is, I spent much of my youth being mad that the adaptation wasn't right, and in my old age, I'm just like, no, I'm just gonna have fun with whatever they try to do. And Flanagan, he really gets it. So even if he changes things, I mean, he's gonna have to change things, but whatever he changes, it's going to be something really incredible, assuming he gets to do it, obviously. So yeah, we're super thrilled about this.
I did like Rings of Power. I was
Okay,
okay
good.
with it. I really was. I haven't really nerded out too hard on the external Tolkien texts that I
Mhm.
think they were referencing. So I was just radical acceptance across the board. But I was thrilled. I was thrilled to get a good look at, oh, wow, this is early elves. Whoa. I enjoyed it.
Me too. Me too. Enjoying things is more fun than being mad about how they're not perfect, right?
Agree. With King stuff, I have to really discipline myself. I do, but I try and take the same approach that you and Scott do is just be objective and try and look at it in categories of strengths and weakness rather than like this was garbage. However, at the end I do get a little feisty sometimes, I think.
Sure. Especially if you can see how it could have been better, that it can be hard to hold back if you're like, how did you miss it, you know?
Right. I get really upset when they completely alter the story. And it's like, you didn't have to do that. You could have just omitted if it was too long. You could omit. That's fine. But
Uh-huh.
why did you rewrite and make it fake? And then
Yeah,
you made it harder for yourself. And then now it's not successful at all. I get a little cranky with that.
absolutely. Understandable.
Blatant interpolations.
Yes.
Do you chat with non-king folk? I know you mentioned that Hearts in Atlantis is kind of the one you recommend. What are some of the other titles you might throw out to somebody who's never read King, or someone who hits you with, I don't like scary stuff, I don't read him?
So the other book that I've recommended has been The Long Walk. I really love that book. And I don't think it's just recency bias. It was one of the more recent novels that we read, but that has so much going for it to me. It is this honest, heartbreaking look at what it is to be a young person and the struggles that a young person goes through. And then there's layers and layers on top of that, where it's examining the social expectations we put on young people, and then the idea of you could specifically view it as a metaphor for war, but I think it's more than that. Like that's the thing, is it's like, yeah, you could write a whole thesis on just the idea that it's about the Vietnam War, but it's so much more than that. You can say so much more about it. And it really resonated with me and just had me just thinking a lot about what it was like to be a kid of that age. And yeah, so that was one of my favorites, and not a supernatural book. I think a good gateway for a certain kind of person who maybe is averse to or not thrilled about the fantastic, right? And it depends on the person you're talking to, right? Because some people are much more open to that. I think a certain kind of person I would recommend The Shining first, because it is supernatural. It does the thing that King does so well, which is to take something very human and then elevates it using genre tropes and conceits to turn it into a fantastic story, which it's a formula that he uses to great effect in many places. I think The Shining is a great example. Yeah, those are the ones I would shoot first. Of course, I do think it's somewhat personal, actually. Well, yeah, what do you tend to recommend, just out of curiosity?
Sorry, I was thinking about The Long Walk. I was really
Yeah.
meditating
Okay.
on that.
Yeah, yeah.
I really recommend 11/22/63.
Okay. I haven't read that one yet. Cool. Okay.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited for you to read it.
Yeah.
That one is a ton of fun. It's a longer one, so I actually really like your suggestion of The Long Walk, even though that one was a really hard one for me
Mhm.
emotionally.
Yeah.
It wrung me out. It wrung me out real good.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like that. But that's why I love it. I mean, that's the thing about the drawing of the three is it's like, oh, it's fun. It's a roller coaster ride. I use these words and it's like, yeah, but sometimes you want something that just destroys you
Yep.
and you're like staring after you finish it. No, it's amazing. It's an amazing book.
It's an impressive text, especially when one realizes that he's 18 when he's
Mhm.
writing this and he's like in his college dorm, which blows my mind. I think it just that would be one where I don't even want to think about rereading it, Matt. It
Mhm.
was so hard for me to get through because I'm a pretty emotive person. I'm a very emotional person, and I have over the years come to like that and respect that and understand that about myself. And so I have to be very careful with my little marshmallow heart. And it's so hard for me to put myself in a place that annihilated me emotionally.
Sure.
Although you speak such truth, it is amazing and it is a fantastic text to analyze and break apart and examine. It's strong.
Yeah. I'll just riff on that for a second. I read some things that I feel are sort of nihilistic and hopeless and they make me feel awful, and I finish them and I'm like, I kind of just wish I hadn't read that.
Yeah.
And that is totally different from the kind of devastation that The Long Walk brings, or that certain other books that I could name, but I guess I'll refrain for now, of his, where it's like, yeah, you ripped my heart out of my chest, but I'm glad that we did that. I'm glad we went through that journey together. I feel like I learned something. You earned these emotions from me fairly. And that is rare, actually. I mean, we read fair number of books, and I think The Long Walk hit me much harder than almost any of the books that we read, King or outside of King.
I'm going to be thinking about that. I think you're onto something. And I don't hear it mentioned a lot in my constant reader interviews, I do talk about it with a few folks. It's an
Mhm.
amazing book that really needs to be read and celebrated and analyzed. All the behind the scenes stuff, how young he was when he wrote it, this huge anti Vietnam sentiment, this current running throughout, this mysterious dystopian society. We
Mhm.
don't really get a lot of background info as to what is going on, why they're choosing the walk, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't had, I finished it, I did my podcast episode, and I'm like, all right, I'm done. But I think it is kind of nice to revisit it and talk about how horrible it was because you said it beautifully. There is something very real there, especially if it's a shared experience.
That's a good point. I do have the advantage that with all these books, I get to go through them with my book doula, Scott, who is helping me process. I get to go through it slowly and process it as I go and discuss it. And I feel like that might help me metabolize these things a bit better than if I just rushed through the long walk in one go. I think that would have felt very different, honestly. So I understand.
For sure. But yeah, I think I'm gonna have it in my mind here for a while.
Cool.
There's some stuff I forgot about, so good choice there.
Awesome.
We're going to head into some fun ones. These are just fun little ditties that I like to ask King fans. This question is asking if you could get stuck in any Stephen King fictional setting, which one would you choose? This could be a sunny, happy location, not that there's a lot of those, or one that you find the most rad in its horrifying elements.
Yeah, well, so like the joke answer is like, well, the Derry in the 90s actually sounded pretty chill as long as you keep your head down. But that's a boring answer. I mean, Midworld as a setting is fun. It's a fun concept because you never know what's around the corner. It's radically bizarre. Like that's what he's going for. Is he's going for this feeling of you have no idea what's in that cave. There's a cave, could be mutants, could be robots, could be zombies, could be AI mutant robot zombies. Literally, I mean, I would die or a fate worse than death in all likelihood. But while you're experiencing it, it would be quite remarkable, right? I got to go with Midworld.
So good. Do you have any contenders for a favorite Stephen King female that you've encountered thus far?
Really enjoying Bev in it currently. She's a very, very specific character. She's a very you're not going to mistake her for any other female character, right? Which is I guess an accusation I've heard people make that I don't know that I agree with. But I think my actual answer is Susanna Dean, who is a character who we get to spend a ton of time with, and she is, I think, just like literally one of King's most multidimensional, multifaceted characters, bar none. I mean, up there with Roland, honestly. And I think he's exploring a lot of different ideas that he's interested in through her. And so there's a lot of him in her. He puts a lot of thought into Susanna Dean. I don't want to elaborate on that too much because I know you're only like halfway through the story, but she is just a really remarkable character. And again, because the series is so long, we get to really soak into the complexity of that character. And he's so good at villains that I have to just shout out Annie Wilkes is a great villain. I haven't actually read that, but like so many of his villain characters are so strong that if you ask like what's your favorite female character, it's like, well, honestly, a lot of my favorite characters of his are villains anyway. So might have to go with some of the villainous women. And Wendy Torrance is also a fun character while we're throwing out honorable mentions.
Susanna Dean blows me away.
Mhm.
I cannot even with that lady. I am just speechless with how many layers she has. For me, I notice a lot of dark goddess archetype stuff.
Mhm.
And I'm just amazed with how crazy, literally crazy, and just what
Yeah.
multiple people. She doesn't have legs.
Yeah,
She is someone who I could just do an entire dissertation on, Susanna Dean.
that's a good way of putting it because I feel like even now I don't fully have my head around what we're doing with Susanna Dean, which is maybe a statement you could make about the whole of the Dark Tower, where you're waiting for the moment when everything will click and become clear, and Stephen King will say, "This is what I'm trying to do with all of this. This is what this character is about," and it never quite arrives, and you're left thinking about it. And then you realize, oh crap, he tricked me into approaching his story with a literary mindset. Damn it. So she's a perfect example of, I think, his strengths of character writing, where it's absolutely perfect, compelling psychology, but then it's wrapped in this utterly bizarre package. So many strange choices, right? Especially in, well, really everywhere, honestly. But a very interesting character. Yes.
Now that you're reading Beverly, she is one of the most beloved Stephen King females.
Mhm.
Every time I talk with constant readers, Beverly is usually in the conversation when it comes to Stephen King females. She's really almost holy. And I love examining why that is. And I don't know if it's just her position amongst the Losers Club and who she represents, or the fact that she's so victimized by her father. Because, yeah, Beverly is so beloved. Why do you think that might be now that you're kind of in Derry making your way through?
Well, I think everybody loves an underdog, and Bev is a kind of perfect underdog. She, not that it's a contest, but she seems to have it the worst of the losers. We really get to spend time understanding how bad she has it and empathizing with it and seeing this little girl go through these things. I have a daughter who's like exactly Bev's age in the flashback portions, and so it boils my blood even more than it otherwise might have. But anyway, it makes you so mad on her behalf, and that's just a great recipe for developing empathy and really making sure that the reader is in that character's corner. I think there's more to it than that, but I think that's a big part of why people side with her so much is you're like, hey, you get to see her literally and figuratively beat up so much that you become defensive of her.
I think that's perfect. I think you nailed it. That makes so much sense. We only have two more, I think, two or three more.
All right.
We're winding down just a skosh.
Okay.
Do you have a favorite Stephen King duo? This could be a bromance, general friendship, married couple, dating couple. Is there anybody in a duo or a group, if you like, that really just moves you?
Yeah. So one that really jumped out to me, and I don't even know if I can explain quite why, is Jack Sawyer and Henry Layden in Black House. I just love them. I just think that they're great. I love the you've read this book, I assume.
I haven't, I'm sorry, but I know what it's about, sort of.
Okay. Then I don't. Then I almost regret saying that because that there might even be a spoiler in the fact that I said that at all. But I'll just say very vaguely that you just fall in love with their rapport. Their It's ineffable. That's the thing. And when you say ineffable, what you really mean is you can't explain it. But I can't explain it. I just love the interactions between those two characters. It's just really I found it touching and beautiful.
Oh, good. I heard really good things about that one. And I'm in a Stephen King fantasy zone right now. I finished The Eyes of the Dragon. I just finished Fairytale. So I'm eager to kind of observe more of his fantasy output. And I've heard that one's a fun one.
Yeah, I like that one.
The only thing I'm apprehensive about is I haven't yet read a Stephen King collaboration story. And so is it tricky with writing style? Like, do you know who is King and who is Straub?
The funny thing is that me and Scott consistently would say, well, this is definitely King, but we don't know that, obviously. You do feel like you can tell the difference. But I heard at one point that whenever they were writing that, especially the Talisman together, King would try to mimic Straub's style and Straub would try to mimic King's style. So for all I know, we've been completely backwards at every turn, and I have no way of ever knowing. I think the weirdest thing about those books is just that, from a plot perspective, from a pacing perspective, mainly from a pacing perspective, honestly, it really does feel like a book that was passed back and forth between two people. I don't know if you've ever tried to write things in a sort of a pair fashion like that, but it definitely results in some pretty bizarre pacing because one person thinks we're going this way, the other person thinks we're going this way, and you just kind of jerk back and forth, and then you go over here in this little oxbow, and then you go over here in this cul-de-sac, and you get to the end eventually, and you have a fun time. on the ride. I think this is the litmus test of like, if you're really a reader who enjoys the ride genuinely, then you'll have a lot
Mm,
of fun with these collaborations because they can try your patience if you're not in the mood for a meander.
mm.
I happen to like a meander, so I enjoy these books, but it's just objectively true that the pacing is a little weird.
Copy that. Good to know. That's so, so helpful because I get recommendations for Black House and Talisman all the time, but I'm like, I'm a little bratty about it because I take my time with style and with his narrative choices, and I kind of analyze that a lot. And I'm like, I don't know who this person is. I don't know Straub. I've never read Straub. That's more work for me.
Sure.
I'll get there eventually. I'm just super bratty about it right now.
It's totally valid because we would catch ourselves discussing that book and being like, and so what I think King is saying, well, what I think what I think is happening here, right? Because it's because you can't just impute it onto one person constructing a story. It's a story that's almost growing without any specific person's guidance behind it. So yeah, it's weird. It's weird to talk about. I agree.
We have made it to, I think, my last question.
Okay.
So this is amazing. Your top three or your top five? What are your favorites? And this could be novels or short stories. It could be a top 10, your king of the castle, whatever we want.
Okay. Yeah. So nothing I say here is going to be surprising considering what I've said up to this point. But Low Men in Yellow Coats and actually the whole of Hearts in Atlantis. I I don't know what the generally held fandom opinion is, but I just sort of think of it as a big book with parts, right? And Low Men in Yellow Coats is one of the parts. It's the biggest part. It's kind of the central and most definitive part. But like that whole just Hearts in Atlantis as a unit, I think is brilliant. I think he's doing so many interesting and unique things with it. That's one book. That's one that I want to revisit and reread. That's probably next on my like reread list. So that's number. I don't know. I'm not going to rank these, but these are my top three and whatever. So then the Long Walk would be on this list as well, for all the reasons that I described. I just think it's amazing. It affected me personally very deeply, and there's something about the fact that he wrote it so young that I don't know makes it gain an extra glow for me. It's like it feels more raw, and also because it's a Bachman book, where Bachman is his representation of like the dark id,
Unfiltered.
unfiltered id of Stephen King. Yeah, where he's like, I'm not gonna even try to leave you with a good feeling walking away from this.
Yep.
And I like that. And then I think The Drawing of the Three is probably my favorite Dark Tower book. Although maybe depending on what mood you catch me in, I might say Wizard and Glass. And in some moods, I might say The Dark Tower, the final book, or I might even say actually The Gunslinger, because I like things that are weird and I like things that make me go, "What are we doing?" But not in a way that's like this sucks, but like I'm compelled by the oddness of this, and that is the way that The Gunslinger makes me feel. But yeah, that's a good it's a good ranking of favorites and maybe what I would want to revisit. And just off the top of my head, I would throw The Shining toward the top of any list of King. That's a huge just masterwork. It's almost so like good that you're just like, yeah, but everybody knows that. Everybody knows you should read The Shining. I want to talk about the ones that are like me specific, like The Long Walk, where like that felt like it spoke to me personally, right? Yeah, those are my list. I don't know. Is that a weird list? Is that an idiosyncratic list? I don't talk to people much about King because I'm trying to stay in my little bubble, right? Scott keeps me in a closet so I don't get contaminated.
That is a beautiful list. That
Thank you.
is a perfect list. And I'm thrilled that it is so personal because that's how it should be. It should be the stuff that moves you and stays with you. That's how it needs to be. No, that's a brilliant list. I love it. And I recently finished The Shining for the second time because I also have a book club I've been plugging in with this summer, just a little extra Stephen King book club. And of course, we're doing the heavy hitters because I like to do the underrated stuff in the shadows.
Mhm.
That's where I like to hang out and spend time, but we're doing The Shining and I spent a lot of time with it and I was just super blown away. I forgot how masterful it is. It is. It's worth celebrating. It's worth lifting up to that high pedestal because you're like, oh my God, this is a story about doom from page one. This is the annihilation of a nuclear family on
Hmm.
page one throughout the entire time with all of this gothic terror mixed in. It's masterful. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. We're gonna drag you through some of the most uncomfortable domestic violence ever put to the page.
Oh, so bad.
And yeah, it's very rough. It's funny. I guess one thing I'll say about The Shining is, I'd seen the Kubrick adaptation, obviously. I'd seen the miniseries adaptation, felt like I had a pretty good handle of what I was walking into, and still managed to be caught off guard by so many different aspects of that book and how much it affected me emotionally, despite feeling like, no, I already know the story. Everybody knows the story of The Shining. What surprises are there going to be? And it really it surprised me quite a bit actually.
I was really moved by Mark. I think it's Mark Torrance, who is Jack's dad.
Hmm.
And I forgot that we do get a lot of very violent flashbacks
Hmm.
into this terrible man. And what's interesting is he's a hospital orderly, I
Hmm.
think. I think he
Hmm.
had like a profession in that. And so I know you haven't read Doctor Sleep yet, but let's just say that that profession pops up again and
Okay.
it's really cool. And so there's a lot of nice mirroring and parallels there, but I was blown away by how much I enjoyed Wendy in the novel because in the Kubrick film, I struggle. I struggle with her performance a lot. I've listened to a lot of folks who love it, who just think it's fantastic and praise it, and I get that. I'm a huge Shelley Duvall fan. I'm
Yeah.
obsessed with fairy tale theater. I love Shelley Duvall. For me, I don't know if it was the right role for her. And we've got the lore that it might have been a very difficult filming situation with Kubrick. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of speculation. The film is so iconic that I always have film Wendy in my head when I read the book. And so I really forced myself to not do that. And so there are some beautiful standout Wendy chapters in The Shining that I
Yeah.
absolutely loved. And she became so much brighter for me.
Sure. Well, that's the remarkable thing about The Shining to me is encapsulated by the chapter Night Thoughts,
Chapter six?
which is on paper the most boring chapter in the world because it's people lying in bed thinking.
Yep.
And you imagine Stephen King's editor going, Stephen, this is just characters lying in bed thinking. This isn't it, but it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it such a unique novel is it's all about the interiority of this family that are tearing apart from each other painfully, all of them aware of it, all of them trying to make it not happen in their own way, all of them kind of in denial about it while being totally aware of it. And I think that's what makes Wendy, by the way, such a compelling character is, she's strong, but also she's totally in denial at the same
Yeah.
time, both things. And Jack is totally in denial about everything all the time. And even Danny is totally in denial. And it's so realistic. And it's like painful because it resonates. And you're like, oh, even if you haven't been through something really even remotely similar to that situation, you're like, oh God, yeah, I have this capacity to just not see things that I don't want to see. And it's hurt. So it's, I don't know, me personally, it's so painful to remember anything in that space of like times when you've been in denial about something being really bad. And King, that's okay. Finishing thought for me is like that's my favorite thing about King is he takes like the worst stuff, like what's the worst time in your life, and you were so in denial about everything involved in it, and it was just a nightmare. And we're gonna take all that misery and we're gonna make a book about it, and we're gonna
Yeah.
drag you through it. And it's a kind of courage and fearlessness in the face of this harsh material, and he just does it over and over. And that's his bread and butter is doing a thing that almost no one is able to do even once, right? Like that's why he's remarkable. Like he's remarkable for so many reasons, but that's the thing that he does that nobody else can do is show you that darkness, and then you pick up the next book. Oh, here's another one with a totally different kind of darkness. um, I don't know how he does it, honestly.
Oh, bravo. Well said. So beautifully said. I did find one little last question that I forgot
Okay,
to ask. It's another
perfect.
little baby fun one. I don't know if you have a signed King text, and some people are really into them, some people are huge collectors. If you don't, and you had the opportunity to get one, only one King text signed, personalized, what would that one be for you?
was given a gift of a copy of The Stand signed, but I would want a copy of The Long Walk.
Nice. Very, very cool.
It would be very fun if he would sign it Richard Bachman. I don't know if he does that or not, though. That would be kind of fun. I have no idea if he does. Is that a thing that he does? Do you know? It would be funny.
Oh, great question. I don't know. I need to research that.
Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind. I'm thinking about The Long Walk now, Matt. It's great. There's a character in The Long Walk who is my favorite, and I loved him so much. And it's not Garrity. It's the one who goes very silent and he goes inward. I think he might be one of the first ones to die. He might be the eviscerated kid.
Okay.
The one where he has a very epic evisceration scene, but he's the kid who goes inward and stops talking. He absolutely goes into himself, and he's one of the first people that the boys start to kind of talk about and look behind at, and he like loses it and goes inward. I don't remember who that is. Do you remember?
I don't remember. No, I think my brain has only, I'm not great on proper nouns. So I've held on to Stebbins, McVries, Garrity, like the three
Right.
main guys, but I'm not that great at this. So is he the guy who lasts longer than it seems humanly possible that he should last? Or is he the guy? It doesn't matter. I vaguely know. Okay.
I think you're right. That's ringing a bell. He was my absolute favorite. And he was the one that I kept thinking about because King takes him out of the spotlight, sort of, and then he actually has all the spotlight because they're talking about him and they're curious about him, and he should have been dead and he's not. I actually think that's him. I think that's the kid. And I don't remember, but he was my favorite, and I think about him to this day. And so we've been mentioning Long Walk. I'm like, oh my God, I'm thinking about him.
I think this conversation has actually made me realize how much I love The Long Walk, because I didn't, walking into this, I wasn't like, this is my excuse to talk about The Long Walk 15 times, but it sure turned out that way. And I stand by it. I really think that's a great book.
You're not alone. You're not alone in that. There's a lot of constant readers that have really absorbed its brilliance. And I'm really happy that we had this conversation because it kind of opened it up for me a little bit. Because I think I slammed the door after I read it. I slammed it and I was like, I lived through that. Thank God. No more. All right. But it's nice looking back on it and observing its power. And I really believe, this is just my own personal hypothesis, Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness, about a British ivory ship going into the darkness of Africa, the jungles. It's basically the book that inspired Apocalypse Now. I feel that was a Long Walk parallel.
Yeah, so I never made that connection explicitly, but now that you've mentioned that, I'm definitely going to have to think about that, because tonally, 100%, we go right into the horror. I think the idea of the Major as a kind of iconic character like Kurtz is a fantastic sound. You're hearing me go through this in real time. Totally. Actually, I love this. And I'm going to be cranking on this for a while. This is great. Yeah.
Good. I'm happy. I am happy that we talked about this because I cracked the door open and it's a good thing. And I'm happy to realize that I'm proud I read that book. And I'm proud that it was very early in my podcasting. So it's real bumpy. I'm just a little baby in 2020 fiddling around by myself. It definitely could use an updated quality sound, but it's raw. My little heart was smashed into a schmear there. And I just loved those boys and I didn't understand why they were getting murdered.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back and listen and I don't know, weirdly vicariously enjoy your suffering, because that's how podcasts work.
Yeah. The schadenfreude is very real. I felt it all. And I remember I read it during 2020 where it was just full on existential dread outside. Absolutely, quite literally the heart of darkness of 2020. And I read it when everything was going down with George Floyd. It was like that same week, Matt, if you can believe. So there's a lot of trauma spooled in there. And so It's a fascinating little time capsule, and maybe that's another reason why Long Walk is challenging for me, is it's like wrapped up in 2020.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot, but it is a masterful text, and I'm glad that I read it, and I'm glad that it's a favorite of yours.
Yeah, anything that happened during 2020, it's understandable if it had a complicated impact. Absolutely understand. Yeah, that's great. I do want to go listen to those episodes though.
Very
Good
cool.
stuff.
I'm gonna let you get back to your evening, but before we go, I'm so thrilled to have had you as a guest. I'm a huge fan of your show, and I'm very, very, I think I said this exact thing to Scott. I'm very nourished by what you guys do.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I had a great time talking to you today. It's so fun to go deep and broad and all over the place with these books with somebody who obviously shares the love. And when I say these things, I know you're nodding along with me because we're on the same page here. Feels so good. And I'll be listening to the rest of your episodes as soon as Scott lets me out of the closet. I promise.
I appreciate you so much. That's so kind because I'm just a little minnow out here with all the big fish. I appreciate any sort of thoughts and camaraderie in the trenches, but I appreciate what you and Scott do. It's so rich, it's full of analysis, and yeah, it feeds me. It feeds my soul on a level that is so helpful. I don't think I would have made it through Wizard and Glass without your guys' help, truly. Like, I felt like I was dying.
Well, thank you. That's so touching to hear. I really do appreciate that. I feels really good to feel like we're actually helping and benefiting people's experience with these stories. That's the goal, right? Like why else bother, right?
Yep. I didn't know how to feel. Wizard and Glass put me in the spin cycle. I was tormented. I was swooning. I was angry. I was confused. And so Kingslingers, Wizard and Glass, it was like a light in the darkness. Like,
Hmm.
okay. I'm going to follow them.
Oh, that's wonderful. I appreciate that so much.
So welcome. Thank you once more. Before we head out, can you tell the listeners fun stuff going on with Kingslingers, anything that you want to plug,
Sure.
and all the good
Yeah.
stuff of where they can find you?
Yeah. So you can find Kingslingers, first of all, over at doofmedia.com. That's Doof means F is for Freeman, D is for Daily. That's me and Scott's names. And that's Doof Media. And we have a bunch of podcasts. One where we just talk about books and movies and fun stuff that we like called the Doofcast. And then Kingslingers, of course, is our really most popular thing that people actually appreciate. And we do for more than just our own edification. In terms of Kingslings right now, obviously we're doing it currently. Next on the docket is Desperation, followed by Do McKee, and then followed by 11/22/63. I just mentioned that in case people are maybe not feeling a need to dive in on it, but they might want to dive in on some of those later ones in future weeks. And of course, you can look over our backlog. And we're going to be having a live event in every time I want to say Derry in Bangor in June 2024. And we are currently scoping out and planning and putting things together. But I can already firmly say that it's going to be a blast. It's going to be an awesome time. And we're just not actually selling tickets or anything like that yet, but it's going to be awesome. So just if you're at all interested, if you live in that area, if you don't live in that area, but you just think it's fun, that's going to happen in June 2024. And we're going to be kind of keeping people up to date on that over on our feed. So if you're interested, you can go check that out.
I am freaking out about that because I've been meaning to make it to Mecca, aka Maine, for a really long time now. And what better way, what better time than in summer and supporting a podcast I love? So I'm like 95% going.
Awesome. I'm so happy.
Yeah.
It's going to be a blast.
Oh my God. I freaked out when I was like, this is the best thing I've ever heard. I'm so excited. It sounds amazing. So I hope everybody goes, and it's just this huge fan conglomerate.
Me too. Yeah, I've never been to Maine actually. So yeah.
Me neither. I'm a little tumbleweed over here in the Southwest, and
Mm-hmm.
I've been East coasting before in
Mm.
that area, but never to Maine. So it would be a first for me as well.
King has really set my expectations very high, I got to say. All right, I'll see you all there then.
Yay! Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a true joy. Thanks again.
Thank you.
That's a wrap, everyone. Thank you to all who powered through and listened to both interviews back to back. I so hope you enjoyed them. Bravo to Matt and Scott. It was such an incredible joy to hang out with these classy gents, and I can't thank them enough for being so kind and generous with their time and king sentiments. I don't know if you all could hear it in my fangirling voice during both interviews, but I am a fan of Kingslingers, dear ones. Oh my goodness. This is the show I go to when the analysis paralysis is real thick, when I feel a bit scattered, when I feel a bit lost in what I've read, when I don't know how to feel and what to do. I go to Kingslingers. With Kingslingers, I feel like I'm walking toward a campfire where two men are chatting, and when I get to the fire, I don't really have to do anything. I just have to sit and listen, and it feels like I'm in school again. I just have to be present, absorb, and learn, and I end up walking away from this campfire feeling stronger, feeling more informed, and with a deepened love for the writing of Stephen King. With Kingslingers, I get to sit in class again, and for someone who loves school and hasn't been able to be a student for a long time, it's very, very special. Thank you once more to Matt and Scott for all of their hard work behind Kingslingers, all their organization, deep investigation, and strong execution. I am a passionate and grateful fan. Please make sure you're all connected to Doof Media, that you are a subscriber and listener of Kingslingers, and I've linked the Kingslingers BANGOR Maine 2024 survey, so please, please, please fill it out. Guys, it's Maine. In summer! The Stephen King tour! Let's go. We're going. You're going. I'm going. We're there. Please fill it out so we can start planning. All right, boys and girls, we're on our way out, but before we go, make sure you're all caught up on Fairytale because that's our next episode. I do apologize for the delay, but it's coming, I promise. We will return to Fantasy King with this 2022 release. Lots to discuss, lots to consider. I'm really looking forward to it, so make sure you're ready. If you are brand new to the year of underrated Stephen King, I hope you had a nice time. Lots of other episodes to click around and explore. And if you haven't yet shared the show with a friend, it would be real fun if you did. I would also love if you would be so magnanimous as to provide the show with a review and subscribe. It would definitely help us snag more King readers as we head into the autumnal months. If you haven't yet said hello to me, don't be shy. Please write in at underratedsk@gmail.com, where I'm checking early and often. And I would love to know where you're listening from and your thoughts on these episodes, your thoughts on King. These novels, short stories, and novellas are always open for discussion and analysis, so definitely say hello if you haven't. I look forward to hearing from you. I appreciate and love every single one of you listening out there. Thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart. I hope you had a good time. I hope you have a pleasant rest of your day. Take care wherever you are, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye.